right. Cool. Well, thank you everyone out there in Streamville. Got another short-ish, rant-ish session tonight. I'm going to try and wrap this up relatively quickly because I know there's a Street Fighter V exhibition event going on the Mad Cat stream right now, and I'm trying to hit that up. But before I do, I wanted to talk a little bit about events. And this is in response to a post that I saw, I think is on like R Fighters, or it might have been on the NeoGAF newbie thread or something. I don't really remember. But now that it's event season, right? Genesis 3 just happened for Smash folks. We had Kumite in Tennessee in the same weekend. Frosty Faustings is coming up this weekend, I think. And that's a really cool event. I'm super sad that I can't go because I went last year for the first time. It was a lot of fun. But events are coming up, and that's kind of a focal point for a lot of people for their interaction with broader fighting games and the FGC and all that kind of stuff. And I know it's kind of an interesting just decision, I guess, for people to make, like, you know, budgeting for events and trying to figure out if it's worth it and that kind of stuff. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about events from my perspective as someone who, for most of my time in fighting games, didn't really go to a lot of these things, right? I didn't travel around further than California, really. And it's only in the last couple of years that I really started trying to make an effort to go to more events all over the place. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about kind of how to get the most out of events, and whether and how to kind of figure out if going to an event is right for you, right? Because, you know, they are expensive. Traveling is expensive, especially if you're living in an area where there aren't that many people playing fighting games. You don't have kind of like easy access to people and whatever. And so a lot of whether you feel like you got something out of the event is kind of based on your expectations, right? And it's based on how seriously you think about your competition versus the rest of the event experience. And so specifically, what I hear a lot of people saying is, you know, like, events are a waste of money, or that I don't really get that much out of them, you know, or I'm not going to win, whatever, so why bother? Which is really, it's certainly one way of thinking of events, but it's not one that I personally get a lot out of. So I'm gonna start by talking a little bit about kind of some of the reasons why people wouldn't go, and why I think, as far as fighting games go, like, I think it's if fighting games are something you're willing to spend money on, events are a great way to kind of level up and build your, you know, kind of your friends and your network, and also just really kind of engage with fighting games in this community at a deeper level. So that said, if you just go and you don't really know how to kind of handle yourself, or you're not really sure what you should be doing, or feel nervous about it, because it's weird kind of like learning about an event on the internet and then going and meeting up with a bunch of people you play fighting games with, that can also prevent you from having a good time. So to start with, let's talk about some of the reasons why people don't go. And then I'll go into reasons why I personally like going to events, and then some tips at the end for kind of making the most of your event dollar, right? If that makes sense. So first reason that people don't go to events is that they're expensive, right? So if you're traveling out of town somewhere, you need to pay for a plane, you need to pay for a hotel, you need to pay for food, you need to pay for your entrance fee, like. There's you know, transportation to and from the airport. A lot of people forget about that one, right? Like, if you're going to CEO and you fly into the the Orlando airport, right? And you're taking a cab by yourself, it's like $50 from the airport to the venue, right? And a lot of people don't remember that. That's you know, for a lot of people, that's at least like a day's worth of food, and that's if you're kind of balling out, or, you know, like, you're on vacation, I'm gonna spend some money, right? And especially when you think of fighting games, like, the main kind of outlay of cash that you're planning on spending is like, oh, well, I have a console and a TV, so I got to go buy those things, but you probably already have them, or you don't think of them as just a fighting game investment. And then a stick, and then the games, and then that's pretty much it, right? Maybe gas for local tournaments or something like that, right? So yeah, events are expensive, and there's stuff that you can do to economize, but certainly if you're thinking solely about how to extract the most fighting game improvement out of your dollar, right? If you're trying to get as good as you can for the lowest amount of money, events are not a very economical way to do that. And so it makes sense that for some people events just aren't kind of the right way to spend their money, right? Especially if you got other hobbies too besides fighting games. You're like, oh well, this is just a thing I like to do every now and then, and maybe I'll go to my local tournaments, but I really want to spend money on my car or whatever other shit. The other reason that people don't go to tournaments is they say, oh well, I'm not going to win, so why bother, right? I don't want to be a pot monster or whatever. And this is kind of silly because it's trivially true for everyone except the people who end up winning the tournament, right? So like out of everyone who enters a tournament at an event, there is probably maybe 5 to 10% of the population at most that has a serious shot at winning it all, right, for any given game. And then everyone else, they have a serious shot at maybe taking out a few of those people in the 5 to 10% before they get eliminated. So you've got like that top tier of people who go to tournaments because they have a legit shot at winning. You have a slightly broader tier, middle tier, right, of people who can occasionally take those people out. And then you have most of us, right, the vast majority of people who enter knowing that if we make top 8, that might be the best thing we've ever done in the tournament, and that's awesome. And really, we're just trying to get out of pools, or we're just trying to not go 2 and out, right? And frankly, if you think of your event money as an investment that's designed to produce a direct ROI, i.e. you're going to win more money there, you're very good at this game, in which case, hey Justin, thanks for watching the stream, right? Or you have your expectations in the wrong place, right? And to explain kind of the way I think of tournaments and events in general, I'm actually going to refer to something that a good friend of mine once told me while I was practicing for my first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament. So backstory here is I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a long time at this point, but when I started, I was mostly just like taking classes and sparring and whatever, and I wasn't really thinking of competing. But since I'd already had fighting game practice and competitive practice in fighting games, I knew that at some point I was going to want to compete in Jiu-Jitsu. But it took me like 2 to 3 years before I actually started competing in Jiu-Jitsu. And I remember like my first competition, we had this huge, we were doing conditioning like a month out and like really working and drilling a whole bunch. And then I had to cut weight and all this kind of super not fun stuff. And I remember I was super nervous for the tournament itself. And my friend and like a great training partner, his name's Diego Cuenca. He's a great friend of mine from back in the day. He told me, and he was a high school wrestler too, so he's a little bit more experienced in this kind of thing. And he looked at me and said, you don't need to be nervous about this, right? You already did the work. The work is in the preparation leading up to the tournament. The reward is the competition. It's not the medal at the end, because you don't know if you're going to get one of those. The reward is that you get to step foot on those mats, and you get to show your stuff. And win or lose doesn't matter. The opportunity to do this is why you worked so hard, why you sweat so hard, why you dieted, and why you paid your entrance fee, right? Really, the way I think about it is the competition is the reward that motivates all that practice, all that preparation, right? So too it is with events and fighting games. You are not a drastically different player before going to EVO than you are after going to EVO. But you are a drastically different player when EVO motivates you to keep on practicing it, right? To open up training mode, every day where otherwise maybe you'd only practice a couple days a week, or to get some extra net play sets in just because, right? The events act as motivators for you to actually turn your grind on, basically. And if you are watching the stream or you're watching this video or whatever, and you consider yourself a serious competitor, then I think that's the way to think about it, right? You don't pay the cost of going to an event because of the direct ROI. You pay it because that's what informs the rest of your practice. It gives you a goal to strive for that's not abstract, right? And it gives you a timeline. Oh, I need to get good at this before X date, right? And I've found that even though they can be expensive, the motivation is real. Right? If you are seriously invested in competition, then the motivation that you get from signing up for a tournament and committing, that'll get you to a few extra practice sessions. That'll get you to a few extra locals, right? It'll motivate you to level up. And that's kind of where the investment comes from, right? Yeah, it's not going to pay out directly, but it is going to make you a better player and probably make you work harder than you would if you hadn't gone to those events, right? And it's not just a frequency thing, right? You can spend all day in training mode or net play, but knowing that there's an event on the horizon is going to force you to focus on your weak spots. It's going to force you to do matchup review and replay review. It's going to force you to take your local rivals seriously and try and expose them, right? That kind of stuff. So just from a competitive perspective, I think there's still a lot to be gained from an event, even if you don't think you have a chance at winning, right? That said, part of this is also about figuring out kind of where fighting, like what kind of role fighting games play in your life, right? If you're like in your teens or your early 20s or something and you're serious about competition, that's great. More power to you, really. Like honestly, it's one of the, you know, taking fighting games seriously was one of the most formative experiences I've ever had. But I also know now, in my old age of 30, that there are all kinds of different ways that I like to engage with fighting games as a community and as a medium and as an activity and a hobby and so on. And competition is just one of those things. Right. I also like I have a lot of great friends in this community that I've made through events, and you know, it's given me like professional networking opportunities too, which is kind of crazy, right? So there's more than, and you know, I guess it also like kind of takes you all around, right? Like I would have never bothered to go to Orlando if it wasn't for CEO. I rarely have excuses to go to the Midwest, but Frosty Faustings and UFGT and now Combo Breaker are pretty good reasons to, right? And like I'm a guy who, like, I live in the Bay Area. You know, I've been in California for most of my life. I don't really have a reason to leave because California is the best place ever. But it is pretty cool to have an excuse to go travel and see like people who I only know through fighting games at their home soil and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think part of the appeal of the event is not the competition. The competition only lasts, like, unless you're really, really good, right? Unless you're that top 5%, the competition lasts for like a couple hours at most, right? And the rest of the time, you're cooped up in a hotel with a bunch of fighting game players. And if you think that's hell, then yeah, you probably shouldn't go. But I think it's a lot of fun, right? So yes, competition is a reason to go to events, but if you're min-maxing your competition per dollar, you probably, like, if you can afford it, then you go, and don't undersell the benefits of practicing for competition, because that's really like some of the biggest benefit you get out of there. But a lot of what you get from an event is more than just competition. It can also build your motivation. It can plug you in with kind of cool people and that kind of stuff. So here's the part where I talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I like from different events, right? So to start with, if you're going to, say, a regional, right, and you can drive to that, maybe it's a couple hours away. For one, it'll give you a better idea of who is kind of in your broader local community, right? Like people who you could reasonably drive out to and practice with for a weekend, right? So it'll give you contacts outside your immediate local area, right? So if you think of like locals as like, oh, this is a tournament, like a small tournament at a comic shop that they can make on a weekday, right after work, like that's your local community. But your regional community is important too, because those are the dudes throwing regional tournaments. Maybe they're throwing locals that you'll have a chance to stop by with, and you can, like, these are the people who you probably don't practice with every day or every week, but if you need matchup specific practice, you talk to them. Or if you're traveling across the state or whatever and you need a place to crash and play some games, like, you talk to them, right? So there's always stuff to be gained just by broadening your network of local contacts, right? That's really what makes this a community, is that you get to make friends. On top of that, it's an excuse to travel, and some people need that more than others, right? Like I travel for work occasionally, and like I've been to like Korea and Japan and Germany, and some of the coolest experiences I've had have been playing fighting games in those countries, right? I went to this place in Korea that was just this room that this guy set up with a bunch of consoles, and I didn't know him, but he knew some friends of friends, and so we just hung out and played Street Fighter for a night and like I was there with old friends of mine from like the arcade days, and it's a super cool experience. I've been to Japan, I've played CVS2 there, and I've run into people who I haven't seen since I was last in Japan playing CVS2, or since they were last in the States playing CVS2 like 10 years ago. That kind of stuff is really cool, right? And it's the kind of thing that makes you realize both how big the community is, but also how small it is, right? Like, you should not take it for granted that whenever you walk into a new city or whatever and there's people playing video games, there's probably people there that you have something in common with, and that's super awesome. Also, just as a side note, if you do go to events and you go to like places that you're kind of out of pocket or whatever, like, make sure to eat something that's not at the hotel venue. Like, very, very few tournaments have good food that is in the hotel, right? And it can be easy to just hole up in the hotel all day and play games and get drunk and whatever. But I gotta say, like, if you're flying around to another city or whatever because you want to play some games, take the time to go and eat something too, or get it delivered or whatever. Like shell out for DoorDash or whatever it is, because man, like you want to feel at the end of the day like going to a tournament is more than going to a hotel. Like I can tell you, certainly there's a good amount of my event memories are just like which hotel was I in, right? And it kind of blurs together after a while. So like make an effort to go and get like a local specialty or something. Another thing that you get out of events isn't in the competitive matches, but it's in the casuals, right? So like, like I said, most tournament experiences are going to last for like an hour, right? If you don't make it out of pools, maybe make it to the end. It takes like an hour to run through that bracket. You get some good matches, and then whatever, right? You have the rest of the time there. But you can, all of you came there to play fighting games, and it doesn't stop when the tournament stops, right? Or when you get knocked out or whatever. Some of the best memories I have from tournaments were playing sets against people who I otherwise don't get to see. At Frosty Faustings last year, I got to play against Banana Ken for like an hour in Guilty Gear, and that was super cool, right? I didn't even know him. But we were sitting down and we were playing games, and like I learned a lot, and that was one of the highlights of my experiences there. At NCR 2 years ago, they had that. I think that was when they started doing the kind of the late night casuals room, which was super awesome. And Snake Eyes was just sitting there playing Evil Ryu, so I played against him, and he bodied me in like 15 straight games or whatever. But this was before he was using Evil Ryu, and it was super cool. It was good practice for me, right? Like if you think about it, the fee that I spent to enter the tournament and all that stuff. Some of that I get back in whatever it would have cost me to pay Snake Eyes to hang out and play with me for an hour otherwise, right? And then the last thing is, and this is something which like it's kind of there's a point at which you realize that you are into, say, Street Fighter or CVS or whatever your main game is. You transition from just being into that game to being into fighting games in general, right? Maybe that's your favorite game, but you play a whole bunch of other stuff. And in-person events can be a great place to go and find like old or weird games. So I love CVS2. CVS2 is my favorite game, but it's so hard to find people to play with just because, it's pretty much like arcade standard. PS2 is okay, but like overall, like there's no net play, and it's not a hugely popular game right now. If I go to a tournament, though, I'm almost guaranteed to find people who play CVS2. So when I go to CEO, I play CVS2 at the arcade cab there, and I usually play there more than I play like any modern current games. At Evo, like I bring my own CVS2 setup, and some of my favorite times there is setting up shop in my room and just crowding around to CRT and running money matches or whatever. So yeah, like if you're into weird and obscure games, you can find people who play them, and sometimes you can teach people how to play them too. Like that's pretty cool, right? So this is all the stuff that makes you more than just like a Street Fighter player, a Guilty Gear player, or whatever. It's what makes you like part of the FGC, right? It's like going to events is really some of the deepest ways that you can get involved before you start like running your own events and tournaments or whatever it is, right? Like making your own stuff and selling it at tournaments, right? That's when you're starting to give back a little bit, right? And that's when you become a creator rather than just a player. And going to events can kind of remind you why it is you do it, right? It's because like when you make like no one in the world really knows who I am. But when I go to fighting game tournaments, some people are like, "Oh, hey, I read your book, and that's pretty cool." And that feels great to me, man. I don't need to be famous or anything, but it's nice to be around a place where people like dig the things I'm doing. And for you, like you might find that at a certain point, competition isn't your main shit, but you really want to get good at editing videos or trailers, documentaries, or you want to, maybe you're making those like perler bead things or doing fan art or whatever, like. Events become a place where you can do business, but also where people appreciate that kind of shit. And it's super cool, right? Now, that said, you're not going to have that experience at an event unless you're willing to put yourself out there a little bit, right? And I think this is especially true for people who like, you're used to playing video games kind of alone at home or with your boys. Maybe you've gone out to like a comic shop here or there, but you haven't really made friends there. That can be tricky, right? If you have some kind of like social anxiety, if you're not used to kind of talking to strangers, then events can be super intimidating, right? Because you go there and you're not really sure what to expect, and like no one is gonna kind of like grease those wheels for you, right? No one's gonna go out of their way to include you in anything. the flip side is that everyone's there to play video games, man. So it's not like anyone's really going to try and like keep you out either. And if they do, that's fine. Respect that, respect their boundaries or whatever, and go on and try and meet someone else. It's tricky, right? But like, I actually credit arcades and fighting games with making me a relatively outgoing and like socially competent person. I was super awkward as a kid. I don't think anyone in fighting games knows me from like my grade school or middle school days. And there's only a few people who know me from high school, but like, fighting games basically taught me how to talk to strangers and interact with them, and that was super powerful for me personally. So I think that like events can actually be a good way to kind of kickstart your social skills if they're weak, as weird as that sounds. That said, you kind of have to put in work in it, right? So the first thing you figure out if you're going into an event is like, are you going by yourself or are you going with a crew? Right? These days, if I'm going to an event, I probably know people who are there. It's pretty weird if I don't know at least a few people who are there, just because I've gone to enough of them that you see the same people over and over and over, right? And rolling with a crew certainly has its benefits. Like if you go out with your local dudes, then you can split a room, right? And you can split cab fare. Everything gets significantly cheaper when you're kind of going in a group, right? You also like. You bring your own friends, so you're not ever going to be looking for like people to play with. You're not going to feel like you're lonely or you don't fit in or whatever, right? So there's certainly comfort to going with a crew of people if you have those people, right? If you're going alone, that doesn't mean that you can't save money, which is actually super helpful. Like a lot of times all you have to do is post out on Twitter asking people, right? Like you can just tweet at like me or usually I recommend tweeting at James for this kind of stuff, James Chen, at jchensor, because he retweets all kind of people who are just looking for help in general with fighting game stuff, and be like, hey, does anyone have a room at Combo Breaker or whatever? Like I'm trying to get up there and I was just trying to find somebody to if they have a spot on the floor or whatever. Like a surprising amount of people are totally okay with that in fighting games. So it's not like you can't kind of save money even if you're going solo. You just have to be willing to ask and kind of put yourself out there. And that's actually a pretty good way to meet people. Like I've had randos just crash in my room before because a friend of theirs was like, oh yeah, no, if we've got like an extra spot in the bed or whatever, give me a couple bucks and we're good. And like that's not a bad way to start making friends, right? If you do end up going with a crew, though, try to not just hang out with them, right? Like certainly you want to hang out with them, right? It's your buddies and you get good practice with them or whatever. But part of the advantage of going to events and is expanding that crew, right? So like maybe they have friends there that you can meet and that's pretty cool, right? But also like don't be afraid to go up to random strangers and just be like, hey man, like I see you standing around the Street Fighter 4 setup or whatever, you want to play a game? And that's something that you kind of have to do if you're going to an event solo, which is pretty cool, right? Is you have to put yourself out there. And so they kind of once you figured out if you're going by yourself, you're gonna have a bad time unless you're willing to put yourself out there. If you're going with a crew, you're gonna have a great time, but it'll be even better and you'll get way more out of the event if you're okay with broadening your crew a little bit. So the second thing is don't be shy. So everyone is there to play games, right? Not everyone's there to play the game you want to play, but everyone's there to play games. So you don't like that's kind of the cool thing about events is that like for so long, especially if you're kind of an older nerd like me, for so long you're used to feeling like you shouldn't really like you can't connect with people of your hobby because it's super niche and weird and whatever, and you're only friends on the internet. But the great thing about fighting game events is these are your friends from the internet, basically, even if you don't know them yet. Everyone's there, and they're weird enough, and like they're weird enough to be into fighting games enough to go fly out to some random fucking city to go check it, to go compete against other people and see their friends and whatever, right? So you may think you're weird, but like in the grand scheme of things, you're not that weird. I was at CEO 2 years ago, and I ran into this dude, Zerk, who I'd never met before, but I just heard him talking about how he was going to go to YowieCon to pick up girls. And he was dressed as Balrog. And I was like, man, I have no idea who this dude is, but that's a great story. I just turned over and talked to him, and I saw him again there like the last year, and that was really cool, right? But the trick is that you can't be shy, and you have to accept and embrace that everyone there is going to be a little bit weird and nerdy, and that's exactly why we're there, right? The corollary to that is not only can you not afford to be shy, right? Like if you're being shy, then you're wasting your event money. But you also got to ask for games, right? Just don't, like if someone's sitting down at a setup, if two people are playing, just go up and be like, yo, let me get next. right? And if it's just one person playing, then be like, hey, like, you know, do you want to play? Like, you mind if I get in this? Do not be shy about asking this. I swear to God, I see so many people who just feel nervous and they kind of hem and haw and look around like they're waiting to be invited. Nobody's going to invite you, or at least you can't count on that. But there's nothing wrong with asking, right? So just whoever it is, just, you know, don't be intimidated by it either, right? Like if Ricky or Justin or, you know, Knuckle Do or whoever you're like your fighting game idol is playing some games, like go and ask if you can play them, right? There's the worst that they can say is no, and trust me, like they'll say yes or no all the time. Like that happens to them all the time. So don't worry about it. They probably won't even remember who the hell you are. Just try not to be too weird about it, and it'll be cool. The flip side to that, and this is point number 3, is don't be like a super thirsty social climber, right? So like at the end of the day, we're all there to play fighting games. Whether you're Justin Wong or whether you're Johnny Donuts, it doesn't matter. Everyone's there for the same thing, right? The top players are not having more fun than you, and they're probably not doing anything different than you. And I know because I've been to enough of the kind of like elite, you know, like after parties and room parties and whatever, to know that at the end of the day, whether you just want a tournament or you just want 2 and out, like you're doing the same shit. You're hanging out in a hotel room. You're probably drinking a beer or something heavier if you got it, right? And you're playing some games and shooting the shit with old friends and new people who you just met. Right. The only difference between like hanging out with like, you know, the top tier players and hanging out with, you know, kind of the mid tier or the noobs or whatever is the number of Evo wins in any given room. But other than that, like everyone's doing the same shit. So don't be envious about them. And also like don't go out of your way to try and follow, like don't be a hangers on, basically. Right. Because that just kind of makes things uncomfortable. When it comes to the game, everyone is down to play with you. Right? And if they're not, whatever, it's okay. Find someone who is down to play with you. But like no one is obligated to like let you into their room or to give you a drink or whatever, right? Which brings me to my last point, like, yo, if you drink and you want to get fucked up at a tournament, do it. Just don't cause any trouble and bring your own shit or be willing to pay for it, right? And that goes for pretty much anything, right? Like don't expect, like be thankful when people are hospitable, but certainly don't expect it. And to go back to like the social climbing thing, I think really what you kind of want to realize that like, you know, you're there to have a good time. And if part of having a good time is like hanging around getting a top player's autograph, then go ahead and do that. But like you go to enough of those events and you realize they're just like you, except they're better at fighting games. And that is like, yeah, that's pretty much it, right? You don't gotta spend a whole event trying to chase like a top player around or whatever to feel like you got your money's worth. And that's kind of part of this weird like gradual increase of celebrity that we see in fighting games. So yeah. Real quick, just want to run through like some of the highlights of the different events that I've been through at Combo Breaker, over in the Midwest, like by Chicago. They've got some really cool auction events that they kind of inherited from UFGT. I was at the last UFGT, and there was a great CVS2 character auction. I believe it's on YouTube somewhere, but the highlight was I OCV'd a dude with R1 Athena, I think R2 Athena. That was pretty hype, and he was playing like, I think it was Sakura, or it was Blanca, Sagat, and Dan, something like that. Maybe it was Dan, Sakura, Blanca. I think that might have been it. Yeah, so like auction events are super fun. There's a lot that you can do to make competition in these fighting games interesting, beyond just the standard like double elimination bracket, right? There's stuff that you can do around character formats and risk reward and that kind of stuff. So an auction tournament is basically when there's an auctioneer who sells characters, and so if you want to enter the tournament as that character, you have to be willing to pay the price. And so what it rewards is people either picking like kind of sleeper under like low tier characters or going all in, right? So like the dude that I played paid $80 for a CVS2 team, and I paid like 15 for mine, right? That's pretty cool. Frosty Faustings and CEO Taco are cool because they're anime-focused tournaments, right? And if you play anime games, it's rare that you kind of don't feel like you're a side event in some sense, right? You can get embedded to the anime community, and that's awesome. And like if you're at Evo, then you know you're just surrounded by other anime players, and that's great. But it's kind of cool to have to go to an event where your game is the main event, right? And so it's been super awesome to see that the anime community has been kind of getting events that are specially catered for them. So they're not always just, oh, this is a side stream, or this is like, 3 games before Street Fighter or whatever. CEO itself is a lot of fun. Shout out to Alex Jabali. Like he's I think like his tournament is great. It's super entertaining. The venue is really cool too. It's kind of like a resorty spot. So like there's a lot of outdoors. Sometimes it's rainy and muggy and that's gross, but it's also like the kind of event layout is such that like outside the main hall, everyone's just kind of in these different like, I don't know how to describe it besides basically a resort, but you end up with this very open air environment where there's just a lot of people walking around late at night, like walking around drinking and hanging by the pool. There's a pool party there, usually a night or two. And it's a super fun kind of mellow place to catch people, right? Like out of all the tournaments that I've been to, I think CEO is probably the most social and easy to meet people. And then Evo, of course, that's the main event, right? Like, I always am a little bit disappointed by Capcom Cup because as an event, I just don't think it's entertaining or as fun as Evo, because everyone's at Evo and everyone's just having a good ass time. There's almost too much stuff to do there, right? There's the panels, there's the indie games, there's a lot of side tournaments and side setups for pretty much everything. Whoa, I didn't even know Evo had a Twitch icon. That's super cool. And like for me, Evo is almost too busy just because everyone's there, and so you always like everyone who over the course of the year's events, you're like, yo, can't hang out right now, but I'll see you at Evo, right? Like then you actually have to hang out with them. But it's so cool to walk into a casino and just realize that like there's a whole bunch of people there gambling, and then everyone there is carrying around a fight stick and they're setting up Marvel 2 matches like in the lobby and whatever. Like that I don't know, that Evo is a magical tournament to me. I think that if you want to pick one tournament to go to, you go to Evo. But if you have a budget for something else, like any of those other tournaments that I mentioned are great, right? So to kind of circle back, like, so what about the money, right? Like, at what point is it worth it and what point is it not? I think if you do all the stuff I tell you to do, you'll definitely have a better time than you would. But still, when you're talking about like competition and taking it seriously, if you're actually, if basically the reason that you're providing for being skeptical about going to these events is because you could be spending money on other things to get better as a player, well, that's probably true. So as a competitor, I don't think tournaments like major events are worth flying to unless you're also going to locals, right? Let me spell that out. Like I said, if you're in this because you're competitive and that's the main thing that you enjoy and you're just trying to level up, or leveling up is your primary goal, like I can tell you that I thought that I was that guy, and so I was going to these big events because I wanted to get better and play against the best and whatever. And then I realized that I was going to those events and using that as an excuse to not go to my locals, right? And I lived in SoCal, where like, yeah, it's a pain in the ass to get from the west side of LA to Super Arcade, but I should have been there more, right? And when Super Arcade closed down, like I should have gone to Ultimate Gaming Center more, and then I think they closed down or relocated or whatever, right? So like, and then I realized, like, I go to these events because, I mean, for one, like, I can afford to. I don't have any kids. I got a decent job, so and I have a lot of fun, and I get to see a lot of old friends, so it's worth it. But as a competitor, it's not worth it unless I am taking advantage of the fact that that I have a major event coming up, and so I should be practicing my ass off, right? And I should be going to local tournaments. So like if I had to paint a picture of what a full competitor's practice pattern would look like, it would look like something like this. You have your solo play, right? And that's stuff that you do at home. So this is the grinding. This is watching videos and studying them, watching your own videos and studying them, copying tech and trying it out. Getting in the lab and inventing your own shit and seeing what work, like what you think could be promising and what doesn't. Getting your execution down and experimenting with new setups or new characters or whatever, right? That's all the stuff that you do at home, right? And that includes net play, right, to kind of test stuff out. But and maybe with this next generation of fighters, we'll see better net play so that you actually get a good competitive experience. But for Street Fighter 4, certainly we didn't, right? So that's your solo stuff, and you're probably doing that, like, if not every day, then like many days a week, right? If you're a serious competitor. Then you have your local play, and that's like the weeklies that you can hit up in your area, right? If you have them, and if you, I mean, and I feel like for a lot of people, especially if you're playing, a mainstream game like Street Fighter, there's probably a good chance that someone is running a tournament at a comic store or at some kind of like LAN cafe or whatever, right? So it's worth looking for. And this is where you get to test out your experiments in solo play, right? This is also where you start to make friends with your local crew, right? And that's super important because you can only progress by yourself so much. A lot of what you get out of fighting games is leveling up with other people, because other people should be, if you make a good friend, if you find the Ken to your Ryu, then he should be, he or she should be helping expose your weaknesses and helping you figure out what they are and helping you figure out how to fix them. And you can do the same, right? And that's how you kind of level up and get better. And you get the most out of that from local play, right? That's what motivates you. Like basically what it comes down to is Evo as a goal, or a major tournament as a goal, is great, but that Evo is also far off, right? So it might not be as motivating as knowing that some guy you beat all the time is getting free money down at the comic book store, right? So for local play, that's about testing out your experiments, right? About kind of like, you shouldn't go into every local tournament thinking, oh, I gotta win this. You should go into every local tournament thinking like, oh, I gotta try something out against people who are playing live, right? And the idea is you want to try it out there so that when you're playing in a major tournament, you don't get the jitters as much because you've done this before. You know what you're doing. Like there should be nothing new about your game when you're playing at a major level, right? But really the important part about local play is forming that crew. Right? It's getting your practice buddies down, finding people who you can have like training sessions with where you just grind together. If you're not getting that, then you're not really improving nearly as much as you should. And I think in my experience, that's certainly been how I've improved the most, is when I have consistent training partners. I got much better at Marvel when I was playing with my Marvel buddies like every other day, right? And like the matchup never changed that much from day to day, but it was consistent practice. And every day I'd have a little something that I'd then go home and be like, okay, next time I'm gonna try this, right? You make this incremental practice, or you make incremental improvements over time, and it leads to a huge benefit overall. And all you have to pay for that is like gas and Subway or whatever, right? Then you get to the event, right? So this is the big events, this is the regionals and the majors that you're traveling for. That for you, that's about competition. That's great that you should compete. But again, that competition is only going to last for so long, right? Because at some point, like unless you're the one person who wins, everyone else loses. And so then you should absolutely give it your all. But then after that, you should be having fun, right? Because for most of us playing fighting games, it's about having fun and learning stuff and making friends. And the competition just kind of gives us an excuse to do all that, right? Like, I guarantee you, if the only way you could have fun by playing fighting games was to win Evo, then no one would be doing this, because only one person gets to win Evo every year, or I guess one for each tournament, right? So when you think of your own motivations, yeah, it's great to daydream and to think like, oh man, someday, like every year I watch the Evo Moments videos and I think, someday I want that to be me. And I know that I'm probably never going to make top 8 at Evo, but it doesn't matter. I watch the videos, and that's what I think. And it's that feeling that motivates me to go out and pick up a new game, or to practice, or to go to another event or whatever. And that's great, right? But at the end of the day, the fun that I have isn't just about that, right? It's not just about winning. Lord knows, if the only fun that I found in fighting games is winning, I wouldn't stick around long, because I do a lot more losing than I do winning, right? So you got to remember that, like, if you're in fighting games for a year, yeah, maybe it's easy to think mostly about your wins and losses or whatever. But like, I've been here since basically since 2000 was when I started playing fighting games seriously. And I don't have any tournament wins to show for it. I do have one. I have one tournament. There's one time I won a tournament. It was at an anime convention in Cal State Northridge in SoCal. I was there for college, and we went out to a Smash tournament. They also ran a Third Strike tournament. So I brought my Moss stick, and I bodied everyone. And everyone was pretty much intimidated by the fact that I owned my own stick. They were like, I don't even know if this is allowed, blah, 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 blah. Shut up. Ironically, I don't like Third Strike, but the only tournament I've ever won was the Third Strike tournament. And my prize was a bunch of Street Fighter the movie DVDs or some shit. I don't even remember. And I remember it mostly for thinking, I guess I just, that was not fun at all, right? So, yeah, it is one of my least memorable tournaments ever. And the stuff that I do carry with me, if anything, are the times that I've lost to really famous people. The few times that I've beaten really famous people, but again, that's not something that I would think of as like a thing to keep me around in fighting games forever. But mostly, it's the friends and the good times, right? Like the long conversations, the people like just getting drunk in people's rooms and messing around, like playing poverty games and learning that stuff. Like that's what's kept me here for over 15 years. It's not tournaments and it's not the winning. It's all the stuff that happens around that. And I think that like we like to talk a lot about competition in fighting games, but to me, competition is something that focuses my practice. Like my goal is not to win a tournament; it's just to get better. I want to be better today than I was yesterday, and tournaments are one way of proving that out. But I don't compete. I don't grind for the tournaments, right? The tournaments is just a way to prove that. Like what I want is the satisfactions of self improvement. Tournaments are only one benchmark for that. And as long as and I think that for anyone who focuses too much on winning a tournament as the motivation, you burn out super quick. Yes, you can probably get good quickly, but you're not going to be around for a long time. At the end of the day, you're not going to be having a whole lot of fun. And really, that's kind of why I'm in it. That's the stuff that I see that's so beautiful about fighting games, about events, and everything is just like it plugs me into a community of people who are also interested in self improvement, and that stuff is super powerful. So that's basically what I had to say about events. If anyone's got any questions, go ahead and post them in chat. Otherwise, y'all have a beautiful night, and I will go watch the Twitch stream that Mad Cats is running over at the Foundry.